Evo, da li se čujemo? Čujemo se. So I will immediately start speaking in English because we have international guests here tonight, even here among us and in the audience. Thank you very much for coming. Good evening. Thanks to my guests who arrived from different parts. Molly Haslund from Copenhagen, Zdenkom Badovinac from Ljubljani, and Šejlom Kamerić from Sarajevo. My name is Irfan Hošić, and I'm very glad to see you all tonight here. Thank you for coming. Before I introduce my guest, I would just use the opportunity to say a few words about the topic that we are talking about tonight. It's, I would say, very local one, related to the context of Bihać and maybe even about KRAK. The title is Curating the Periphery, and it actually tells the story about KRAK from last few years since the KRAK was open, and its intention to, how to say, penetrate in a social tissue, in a local community. Of course, not to be limited only locally, but to somehow even articulate visibility, or what I mean what I want to say, like discourse about contemporary issues, and in a wider, regional and even international context. And therefore, since I'm born here and since I know dynamics of that place, and I experienced the previous system, socialist Yugoslav system, and now since the independence of the country, somehow I experienced that transition, which I can very clearly say, which the transition that is not successful, and it's failed transition, and many things and many issues that are, let's say, a standard in other part of the world are here somehow neglected or failed, and we are simply still dealing with post-war and post-genocide traumas and failed political decisions. Even the work behind us tells us the story about the Dayton Agreement done in '95, which still serves as it was intended to be as a new orientation, but I would say still serves as a desorientation to lose yourself more and more. Tonight with us are two of artists who implemented some artistic projects in the city. Molly Haslund did a project Swings, which is in downtown since this summer. We will talk later more about that piece. Šejlom Kamerić is about to, we are about to finish her piece proposed by her also in a city center. We thought that we will be successful in this before this conversation, but since it's always very complex story, like collaboration with contractors and workshops, it's always challenging, and we are just patient. I think it's going to happen very soon. The object that we will work, it's in the behind the scenes, so we are progressing. And Zdenkom Badovinac, I was thinking and believing that her experience in Yugoslav art and Slovenian art in post-Yugoslav space. She was one of the most prominent scholars who mediated the Yugoslav periphery, let's say this way, with the European or international context. Seems to be interesting or best choice for us to discuss certain topics. So we will have, I hope, a conversation of about 15 minutes or approximately, but just to say that also later we have a cooking and connecting session with our Iranian friends. His name is Hussein Haiderinia and his assistant Najib Mahibi. So after this conversation, we will have tasting the food from Iran. And behind there, we will have a DJ set by the Banja Luka-based Tijana Ilmn DJ, one of the most interesting DJs in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So I will just introduce to you my guests, and I will immediately skip to conversation. So Zdenka Badovinac is an art historian and curator, one of the leading scholars that brought Yugoslavian and Slovenian art into wider international context. She was director of the Museum of Modern Art in Ljubljana for many years, and recently director of Museum of Contemporary Art in Zagreb. Thank you very much for coming. Molly Haslund is artist from Copenhagen. Her practice questions complex relations of larger groups within public space, where she tests strategies and tools of mutual relations in the context of absurdity, individual autonomy, and free action in contemporary world. In summer 2023, as I said, Haslund realized in the public space of Bihać her tool for social practice entitled The Swings. You can swing whenever you want. It's open to the audience. And Šejlom Kamerić is one of the most engaged and internationally most represented artists from Bosnia. Among many of her artistic projects, KRAK was able to host her exhibition in abandoned Dom Usavoja a few years ago, called Hooked. We are, as I said, just about to implement her project with the working title The Pump, realized with the larger project Creative Ecologies. I would start with you, Zdenka, actually asking you a question. So you curated and mediated several important exhibitions in international context, focusing on Yugoslav and post-Yugoslav space. And while working on them, did you experience, and what is your experience, this dichotomy or encounter between center, those two categories, center on the one hand and periphery on the other hand? And if yes, what would be your experience, please?
Thank you, Irfan. It's a great pleasure to be here in Bihać, and thank you for your invitation. And it's a great pleasure also to be with Molly and Šejla, whom I know for many, many years, and with whom we collaborated also. Yeah, I think of course, it's a challenging question, and it's not easy to answer it. I remember when René Bloch curated one of the Istanbul biennials. It was in the, I think, first part of the 90s. I don't remember exactly the year, but on the cover there was a drawing, probably done by him, about the center and peripheries. And the drawing was about many centers or many peripheries. It means no center anymore. So that was kind of idea in the beginning of the 90s, when everything started changing because of the accelerated processes of globalization, end of the Cold War, computerization, and etc. All these processes that we know well, and we are, the moment we live at the moment is actually the result of everything what started in the 90s. So I think that that drawing was actually more a hope, a wish, how the art world should be organized. I think that, yeah, it is not possible to say anymore that we still have center and peripheries. This is not possible. But it's also not possible to say that we have now many centers and no peripheries. So what we have at the moment, I think that in the beginning of the 90s, the art world started to work with the peripheries, like the object of analysis of art marketing, musealization, also Eastern Europe. So I was not only in Yugoslav art, of course, but also, you know, I started in '98 with the Body and the East exhibition. That was the first on Eastern European art, and also built a collection on Eastern European art. So it was actually the new niche as African, as Latin American art, and all before so-called peripheries. So what was... I think that all these processes created the illusion that the peripheries ceased to be the peripheries, and they became like the center of interest. And exactly this was wrong, because the center of interest means the object and not an agent. And what I and my colleagues in Moderne Galleria in last 30 years tried to do was exactly to give a word, to give an agency to the periphery. And when you give the agency to the periphery, it ceases to be a periphery. It started to speak. And this is not an easy process, because it is absolutely necessary to be aware about all the danger that the increased interest from the West side meant at that time. And today we see many results of it. For example, in MoMA in New York, which is still our like mother institution, which means still a center. And they created, for example, a project called CMAP. I don't know, probably you heard about it, I don't know. So an online project that started years ago, when they got also a special funding for it, and they invited different scholars, curators, artists from all over the world to participate in an online program with the idea of decentralization, kind of. So they thought that if the central institution give the word to the people from former peripheries, the situation would change. But I think that it hasn't changed in these terms, you know, of relation of center of power to the locations without power. I think that the center of power only got more power. Actually, because we started not only to collect the artworks from all over the world, but also the knowledge. And I think this is the process which is where we are today. So it's not only about the center that presents the art from the rest of the world, but it's also a center that creates a new knowledge with the collaboration of the people from the related spaces. And this is something that is not visible, and it is also something that defines the new, relatively new, at least 30 years old new relation that can be related to the question of center and periphery.
Okay, because when I think about periphery, I'm using, of course, my natural or chosen position from here in Bihać, and when I think about to determine it as a periphery, I of course think about connection, transportation, eventual like no airport, no train connection. The bus connections are the only like not convenient anymore. And even using a car, it's I mean there are like even not only about when it comes to the traffic and those issues, but Bihać experienced within the failure of the fall of the former Yugoslavia, of socialist Yugoslavia, one also additional I would say important thing happened within the new organization of the country in Bosnia, which consists of Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina and Republika Srpska. Bihać somehow became remote, remote enclave or remote region far away from the center, kind of separated geographically from the like mainland of Federation. And on the other side, because Bihać is bordering city to Croatia, there are like borders and borders. For example, Lika region is one of the most biggest suffering region even in EU, and definitely I would say in Croatia. And this is our neighboring reality. We are Bihać is kind of surrounded with on the one side, failed realities, on the east side with Republika Srpska, which is definitely nationalistic, proclaimed entity, what the name says. And it makes the situation even harder and force the city to be more isolated and more kind of peripheral and far from any. We don't belong to Zagreb because we are not Croatia. Banja Luka would be our natural, regional center, but it's not because of the organization. And Sarajevo is too far to be in that way. So that would be kind of the brief description of the current situation here in Bihać. And my next question would be actually in that.
Can I just interrupt you? I think it's very interesting what you are saying, and it's a question: how do you define the periphery? Maybe I was not clear enough. What is periphery? Is something pejorative, right? So it's mostly. So I think that how you described, we talked before our panel about your work here in Bihać, and how you described it, how you are connected to the communities here, and how you work as a hybrid center that fits to the context that is here. I think this is something totally anti-peripheral. It's something that creates conditions for you as an agent, and this is something that works against the concept of the periphery. Mm-hmm. So periphery is something that is a place that is influenced by the trends from the bigger world, let's put it this way, and doesn't contribute anything to in a larger international communication. So I think I don't see I can understand, that people here also, it's so relative. Also in Ljubljana, we feel like in periphery, and in Zagreb and so on. But I think as soon as you have center as KRAK you are not, you are something else. But we can talk later about it also.
Excellent, thank you for this. That was actually, in that direction you answered my question, actually. Okay, thank you very much. Molly, I would like to ask you, you are coming from Denmark, from Copenhagen, and when talking about this relation between center and periphery, from your perspective and from your geographical context, what is your thought about that? How are Danish artists connected within the country or even in a wider international context? Can you say something about that, please?
I will try. Yeah, thank you, and hello, everyone. It's nice to be here again. When I think about this, I think about it a lot from the Danish Arts Foundation perspective, because in Denmark we have state funding, and at the moment I'm in one of the committees, which has made me look at all of this in a different way. Denmark is relatively small. We are 6 million people, and in Copenhagen we are 1.3 million people, and the majority of artists live in Copenhagen. Until recently there has been a change, because artists can't afford making a living. They can't make a living in Copenhagen. So there's been a movement, or there is a movement that people move to the countryside, and professional artists establish themselves in the periphery. And the Danish Arts Foundation actually has a law that we have to spread the art throughout the country, which means that if you're a professional artist living in the periphery, it's actually easier to get funding. And at the moment, I see a lot of projects coming out of that. People make new art spaces, people get funding, like make exhibitions in the periphery. So it is happening, but I actually don't know yet what it means. But from my point of view, it just means that the country has become bigger in a way. What was your question actually?
Well, yes, how the artists are connection within the country and internationally.
Yes. I wanted to say something more about that because in Denmark we don't have much private funding. We don't have that many art collectors. And when you apply for private funding, it's hard to get, and especially if you make critical art, if you make political art. And when you apply the Danish Arts Foundation, you can be lucky to get funding. You can also be not get it, but if you make critical art, for example, you're supposed to get it from the Danish state, and therefore it also depends on who's in the committee. What do they want to? What kind of art do they want to see? So it's always a weird situation, and you never know when you get funding and when you don't get funding. What was I gonna say?
That's already answered.
Yeah. And what was it? The international?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What was that question about?
Well, how are artists from Denmark being also geographically remote, connected, and
Yeah. I mean, some artists go international, but again, seen from the Danish Arts Foundation perspective, if you have an invitation from abroad, it's easy to get it because it's always good to get out there. On the other hand, in my point of view, we are not, as a country, very good at inviting people in. I mean, we are, but it's always easier to get out than it is to invite people in. But that reflects the government policy, unfortunately, sadly. But as a committee member, you can always try and influence these choices. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. We actually talked previously about fundings and how we are funded, and we are actually very proud that we received 3 grants from Danish Art Foundation from one pole of the Europe to another southern pole of the Europe, which is great. Šejla, I have a question for you, quite similar to the previous ones about you spend most of your life in Sarajevo. You are Sarajevo-based artist with, of course, traveling and living abroad. But how would you describe this relation from Sarajevo-based perspective toward Bihać, KRAK, and eventually, I mean, in Bosnian context, that relation between Sarajevo as a center and Bihać as a peripheral, let's say, geography?
Yeah, but thank you for your question, and thank you all for being here and listening to us and this discussion. So first of all, I have to correct you a bit, because it is a little bit illusion that I create that I'm based in Sarajevo, or I'm based in Berlin, or I'm based somewhere else, and I like being in this position between, and that's also very connected to the artwork I make and the practice that I've been doing for the last 20 years, from the first big installation and a public project that I did in Ljubljana, where I know Zdenka from Manifesta. 2000, where I did the installation called EU Citizens and Others, which actually deals with this topic from using different terms. It's not using periphery, but it's using the terms which was used at the borders at that time of the European Union, which Slovenia became a new member of European Union, so the borders are changed, and that's also connected to this idea of what is the center, what is centralization, or what becomes a periphery of the certain union, like in the case of a geopolitical situation that we had back then after the fall of the wall, so-called wall and Eastern Bloc. So this notion of other is actually notion of the term that we can relate to the periphery. Like we are in a position that we are somehow seen as a different, seen less privileged, if you want to look at from that perspective. So basically my practice is and always been dealing with that topic, and in my professional as well as in my private life, I try to juggle these places and actually have the distance from what does it mean to be based in the center, like in the big European centers like Berlin, or being in Sarajevo, which is complete periphery if you look at the Western European position. So is this working? Yeah. So basically, like the for me idea to work between these places is the idea of refusing to be part of the context of or the system which has certain rules, because the center usually gives the tools to create and to outsource the different capital from, and in this case, because we come from the culture and art, it is a culture capital, which center always takes by, like, as I said, like Zdenka described that very well, like in the 90s in the fall, after the fall of the wall and after the Balkan wars, this region and the Balkan, Eastern Europe became very fashionable as a topic and was used as a subject, so in a way, these tools actually is something that I like to play with, to see, how can I be part of that, but also again be critical towards that system. Because if I would choose to live only in Berlin, which I did and I still do, partly my professional life is still connected to the Berlin art scene. Then that would mean that I become a part of one system and that I have to obey the rules of that system. And in a way, I would have a less a critical view towards that system because I'm using the tools of that, or I'm dependent on it. So I think that sometimes, and why I'm saying all this is because the position that periphery actually sometimes allow us is to have a better view of who we are, as well as who is keeping us in this periphery, why we are there where we are. And so there, like in everything, there is a good and bad sides of those positions, because even if you are, even if you have a distance, you have the better vision of how you dependent on these strategies. You are still, that doesn't mean that you can somehow be disconnected. You have to get to this source. And then we can also talk about that source, because the center is actually what is, what we can describe as imperialistic or colonialistic, or are we now living in just something else that we are still, sometimes we refer to that to post-colonial, but like, is it the new colonialism which we live in, which is now described as a globalization, but it's not anymore globalization? Is it, just the capital? So I think it's also, no matter how we localize and we talk about the certain problems of, like, do we have a good infrastructure to move in the region from Sarajevo to Zagreb, or Ljubljana, or Bihać to Sarajevo, or if there is a border, ethnical, national border of this Republika and Federation inside of the country, still it is very, we can always see that through the prisma of the global context in which we live. And in that is actually a proof that something very obvious, that the we live on a round object, and that everything is connected, so the center can only be the center of the earth, and we are all in a province, in a way, in a periphery, so we can go into the space. And
since while we are still here about this discussion about the relation between center and periphery, I was thinking maybe to ask you about Slovenian. We know all that Slovenia is quite well, for our perspective, quite well decentralized, and like the regions are probably better organized as here in that part of the former Yugoslavia. But is there any meaning? I mean, is there any resemblance? I mean, I know from art history about Laibach group and Neue Slowenische Kunst that the guys from that, the members, they are coming from Trbovlje and not from Ljubljana. I mean, how can you tell us a little bit more about that, particularly within Slovenian context? What does it mean being from Trbovlje and the relation to Ljubljana? And it doesn't have to be, actually, my focus is not on Laibach, but about eventual possible like relations from smaller cities to the center.
I think that the reference is very interesting, but it relates to another time. It relates to the 80s. I think that Trbovlje is more provincial and peripheric than it was in the 80s. Absolutely. Not only Trbovlje, but other cities and towns in Slovenia. Because of different reasons, probably. I think one of the reasons is socialism with its self-management, Yugoslav socialism, that put a lot of focus on municipalities. And, you are younger and you don't remember, but you know about it. So it's about each town, each city had kind of, cinema, youth center, amateur film center. We know that a lot of Yugoslav filmmakers were formed in the amateur clubs that were supported via this smart socialist self-management politics. About Slovenia in the 80s, I think there were many centers, not only Trbovlje. I am from Metlika, which is a very small town on the border with Croatia. It was, I studied in the 80s. I was in Ljubljana already, but I was still related to my home. And I remember once I counted, we had 10 punk bands in Metlika, which was really, and not only Metlika, it was Idrija. They have a famous punk band there and many other things. And Trbovlje, of course, it's very special. a group of young people were there, and they were friends, and they were of the same generation, and they were provoked by the condition, and not only of industrial, a small town, but also by its revolutionary history of Rdeči reviri, red reviri, I don't know what would be the English word, but a special part of Slovenia. So I think that the Slovenia in the 80s is very inspirative. Not, we know it's a decade that maybe it became kind of mythical already in Slovenia. But I think not only because of a civil society, but also because of this kind of decentralization. Now there is cultural politics that tries with this and that to stimulate different centers, but it's not the same, I think it's another story.
Okay, thank you very much. Molly, regarding your sculpture, the swing, so your project that we just implemented in Bihać, the swing, is a tool for social practice, I would say, and a tester of collective behavior. Similar project of yours was already implemented in the northern regions in Europe, so far as I know, in Sweden. And my question to you is, can single tool like this one be universal and work in the same flow in two different contexts, and in what extent?
Yeah, I think it is universal, but I think also that the work shifts an energy, like according to what kind of space it's shown in. Like if it's shown in an exhibition space, in a museum, people will approach it like very carefully. Like in Denmark, people are very shy, so if it's in a museum, everyone will be scared of doing something wrong. I have shown similar works in like short time, temporary art projects, like in public space. And here people don't know necessarily if it's art or if it's a play tool. So what happens here is that people just spontaneously use the tools, which is interesting. And the third situation would be like in public space, like here, which would never happen in Sweden and Denmark because it's not possible because of security law. A tool like swings, for example, would be categorized as a playground tool, so it cannot fulfill the security things, because the fact that people can bump together is enough to it not pass. So this situation here is very different, and for me it's interesting to see if it will break or if there will be an accident, or it's a more like an anarchistic situation. And for me, that's a new situation. Yeah, but I think like it is universal. It's not a minimal work. It's not a minimalistic work. It's a work with that works as an elastic band. So a lot of things can happen, and the action around the tools are like more than half of the work, I think. Because if you take the activity around it away, there will be just a dead object. So the use of it is important. What was your question?
That was my question.
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So you are all invited to check her work in a downtown on a otoka, on an island, river island, and in the number of 8 people to visit and participate and to practice swinging.
Yeah, but also a lot of my works, they are demanding like this sort of participation, but But that's the most difficult thing, because even getting 8 people to meet up at the same time is very difficult nowadays, because everyone is busy. So often things around the tools will be chaotic, somebody will be missing, and most of the time everything will be chaos. But what I love is when it actually goes from chaos to this moment when people actually swing in time. It doesn't happen very often, but when it happens, it's like click. And that's the optimal use of that tool, for example, of the swings. Sometimes when I'm in public space with these tools, I act as a guide, not a pedagogical guide, but just somebody who is there that can help. If people ask, or if I can see an accident is about to happen, then I'm there to facilitate. Sometimes I also engage a team of people who sometimes will jump in and show how does this work function optimally. So sometimes once an hour they will jump on the swings and they will be like swinging in time. So a little performance now and then. Yeah.
But I think, although you just mentioned it's hard to gather 8 people, I think it's quite easy that when people on a work or in a school or pupils or students, for example, I was taking my students and we had the swing session and we tried to learn and some kind of knowledge to squeeze out what does it mean and how the group functions. And we were also, we tried also when we install it, we tried to call local politicians to invite them so they can call their teams and their people around them and to test how they work as a team of 8 and how they balance and coordinate. Thank you very much. Šejla, your project that is proposed to be installed, I hope soon in next days or weeks here in Bihać, also requires some interaction and participation and stands also along few main roads in the city. How do you see that mutual exchange between participants and the work? How to engage actually the citizens in that participative artistic process?
Yeah, well, in a way, it's very opposite to the swing, because it's not. It should exist as something that has very practical use. So it is an object that we need, or that is actually of essence to our life. You know, it pumps the water from the ground, and that's how we. That's always how we get the water. You know, so even like every water supplies that we have, that we use in the big cities, small cities, it is always from the ground, because the pressure of the water needs to come from deep in, from the center, as I refer to it. So in this case, it is because we came from the context of try to do something ecological, or to be aware of what does it mean to have the awareness of being sustainable, or what exactly as an artist we do to maintain this life, which wouldn't be just taking and making and using and abusing, but rather making something that not only gives comfort and escape to the viewer, or provoke imagination, but also can be used in a very practical way of giving a water back to people. So here I mean, obviously the public here knows what and how the water is important to this town, and the river that goes through the city is something that is so present and so precious and so beautiful. And although you are very proud of the nature here, still it doesn't, you don't lack of the ecological issues of, like how, like do we pollute the water? How, especially, in Bosnia, because we have so beautiful nature, and that's why we are so careless towards it, because it's like we take it for granted, the forest, the water, the so many rivers that we have. So somehow it came from that idea, like that we have something as a species, like humans are invasive species, like we are now overpopulated this planet. We are using, but in the same time we are sharing the place, and somehow, so this object, this pump, which will like be installed in a center of the city, is it's a golden water hand pump. So the participants or the just passers by can just pump the water, or they don't have to, because the water, luckily we have the water, we have the river and running water in our households or everywhere. But we can also somehow imagine, because we have that from the war memory, and we should have that in our conscious, that the water is not something that we just take for granted and we put we turn it on and let it run, but that it's something that it needs an effort. And that's why this water pump is a hand pump. So you have to, you have to put an effort to it. You like to extract it from the ground, and when it comes, it is something that that as I said, like it requires your engagement, and in that process is also the moment where we have to reflect, because I mean it is also something that I strongly believe, that the way how we live it takes away these moments where we can contemplate. So if we would have more time to walk to the certain points, in our daily commute to the work, we would have more time to think like what we need to do and how to do. Like now we are just rushing and we want things immediately, so we don't have these moments of reflection. It's interesting, something that I have to now I remember, like watching this documentary about the why people in Japan, in Okinawa, live longer, and then like it's about the habits of life, and like why in that part of the world, like you are the things, the objects, like your life is more grounded, like you don't have chairs, like you sit at the ground. And so this standing up and going down and lifting things is actually an exercise, and how that is really helpful to our body, to our movement. So again, to come back, like a ritual, and that's actually something that we benefit from. But we want comfortable chairs, and preferably we would just move in them or float, and we would be fed by tubes, and so we don't have to proceed. So to come back to the pump and water, like it is a it is an object. It because of the gold. It's this golden pump. It is the idea of something precious that comes from the golden pump, and that precious thing is just simple water, which is essence to our life. And then. Yeah, so that's the answer to your question about what is the way how we should use it, or public should use it, but then there are obviously, like in every artwork, there are so many ways to see this work and what it relates to.
Okay, great.
Just a comment, but your palms and my swings, they have something in common.
Yeah.
And it is that they both have this inbuilt score that is not written anywhere,
Yeah.
but you have to just do it.
Yeah, exactly. But that's the beauty of art. It provokes you to do something or not to do, but reflect or to think or imagine. So, and I think that our public installations and sculptures have, more in common, but in a way they come from the opposite ends and meet in Bihać.
And before I open up podium for eventual questions from our audience, I wanted Zdenka to ask you a question about curatorship, since we are really here at KRAK paying attention to taking care about the art, like in a curatorial way, to inviting artists and developing and supporting artists and local community to implement those works, and it's a long-term process that needs a lot of attention and expertise and focus, not just over a week or a month. It's we collaborated with Šejlom more than a year and even longer, and even with Molly and other artists as well. But there is also that like basic question about curatorship, particularly in our times when we face so many dangers around and wars and security questions and viruses and diseases around us and environmental issues that we are not enough aware at the moment, but still, like it's a peripheral story, I think, at least in some areas. What do you think? What should curating do? What could be the mission of the arts and curatorial practice nowadays?
Exactly what you've said and what you've been doing here. I think it's an excellent answer to your question. I think I can add some of my thoughts and my terms and my experience. So my term would be that what you've been doing is situated curating, situated knowledge. It's a term by Donna Haraway, and it relates mostly to the feminist theory, but can be applied to our practices outside the center, or better to say the minor to the minor spaces, or I prefer that than periphery. So something that that needs to be discussed and articulated by the people who work and live here first, but also at the same time informed. It's not about doing something only in the province, in the local situation. I think this would not be the right answer, but situated, at least as far as for me, means to be also related. So it is also to create discussion and exchange of ideas with other localities. And I think what you've been doing here is informed. It's not only local. You work with the localities, but you relate it to the ideas that are around somewhere also in other localities. And this is something that also helps you to go beyond this definition of provincial or province or periphery, whatever. So I think this situated is important term today. So you always relate to the priorities, to the urgencies of your own space, and you relate it to other urgencies elsewhere, and try to also to create alliances around the coalitions. I think my lesson as, of course, museum director in Ljubljana and then in Zagreb is very different. But if I now briefly try to describe it, so with the Eastern Art Collection, I try to establish a dialogue with other spaces, creating kind of symbolic capital with which we at that time could enter the broader international discussions. And then in 2010, I also initiated in Ljubljana the Confederation Internationale, which is today one of the most important museum and art center network in Europe. And I think this is the result of trying to be situated.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Well, that's from my side everything. Thank you very much for your contribution. One applause for our guests. And of course, we will have opportunity to ask that you from audience ask some questions eventually, please.
Hello and welcome to Bihać. I hope you are enjoying. I have one question at the end. So, according to you, who is curating the periphery? So, is actually the center the one who is creating periphery? Or let me formulate the question, does the center, actually periphery depend on the center? Because when Molly was talking about the issue that you were experiencing with the periphery, at the end, the center, actually the Danish Art Foundation decided to create periphery by giving the funds to the ones who are actually in the periphery, I mean the higher funds. So what do you think about this relation? So at the end, does the center actually curate, or does the periphery depends on the center?
For whom is this question, do you think?
Well, for the guests.
For Molly?
Let's start from Molly.
I think it's something that with Šejla we already touched upon. It's about taking the knowledge, the expertise from the peripheries to the center, so this deterritorialization, and then creating the new system of knowledge that comes back, territorialization to the localities. So it's a very complex process. First you help to create something, and then the machine is stronger there in the center, and it forms something new that then we follow here. But if we have more courage and more energy to create something more specific and situated, as I described before, we can contribute to this building of new international whatever knowledge. So today everybody talks about specific localities and so, but there is still an international knowledge that actually all the localities then follow. It's something like that. But we can contribute to that international knowledge if we try.
So courage, energy, and focus.
Yeah, for me, it would be interesting to switch, to shift a little bit this from the, it is always, it depends on from which perspective we look at. So now we talked about the system which recognizes the power and what the center means and what kind of power it has over the periphery. And then we also recognize that the center is using the resources from the periphery, because that's the imperialism, colonialism, capitalism, like this, in which we live. So we establish that. But if we look at it from the, feminist perspective, we can see that we live in a, or not feminist perspective, but we can just acknowledge the fact that we do live in a a patriarchal capitalist, post-imperialistic, colonialistic world, then we can also recognize that the fact that the center is the center and it has the power based on a very wrong ideas, which is the ideas of a dominance. And that actually the dominant is the one who has the resources, and the resources are always coming from the periphery, because all these big colonial nations wouldn't exist and wouldn't have the power if they didn't extract the gold, the oil, the everything, the diamonds, the human force, the slaves from the periphery. So, but that again is very patriarchal. Idea that someone needs to dominate. And if we try to educate ourselves and constantly work on us, and I don't believe it will happen in my lifetime or our lifetime, but if we just try to forget or try to unlearn the pattern in which we live, which is constantly forcing us, like us from the periphery, for those who doesn't have power, to seek that power. But just if we could imagine the world in which actually it is not important who has the power, who is stronger, like what's the issue with that? Like, if we focus that it's about coexistence, it's a symbiosis. It's about using a resource equally, and it's not about also dominating as a human race, because we see that, like this domination of the human race, what will be best for us is actually killing us, as well as the other species on this planet. So I think that, we have to have these kind of, they are not so radical thoughts, but, in an everyday life, which is in the stream of this capitalistic, patriarchal, blah, 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 blah world, it is extreme to take a deep breath, again, this making a pause, do nothing, think, and understand that it's not about the center and the periphery. It's about what we can do to each other and how we can make this world a better place, as, Miss, in the contest of the Miss of the world beauty pageants would say, like peace and coexistence and love, and but that's but that's true, and we shouldn't laugh to that. We should really, sometimes we don't have to intellectualize things. We should just go to the basic and understand these things, and actually KRAK is a good example of kind of balancing that, and that's why I'm so proud that we could work on these projects, and that we can be a small oasis of this sharing, collaborative work, where Zdenka come from Zagreb and go to Munich, Frankfurt tomorrow. Molly came from the Copenhagen. So it doesn't matter where we come from. He's our cook from Iran, and his assistant from Afghanistan. It's it's so wonderful that we can share the space and air and water and food and the music, and yeah.
Excellent. More questions?
I can add a comment, or it can turn to question. There is a creation, and the example is from architecture. There is a creation art historian, Ljubo Karaman, who explored creation small medieval churches, and he found out that they are not the regular as the type which were originally made in the centers. So he developed the term freedom of periphery. So it's far away region where the canon from periphery doesn't come in a real or original way. So there is a special creativity and freedom of periphery to interpret that canon and to find new solutions. And due to the lack of money and materials, it became there comes out new forms and new language. And it was a paradigm for another architecture historian who made a book in the period between the U and EU in Croatia, titled A Peripheral Moment. He claimed that it's a new peripheral moment in Croatia with a very creative new practices in the period where there was a lack of strong in the aftermath of dismantling the Yugoslavia and their rules, and in between the period of getting new rules from Europe, there was a freedom, some kind of freedom out of rules time where architects can make their own rules, and that was such a contemporary peripheral moment. And after we get to or enter the EU, that moment was, or that period was closed. So there is a emancipatory or creative potential of being far away and in periphery, and then to participate on the horizontal level in art, in architecture, on global scene.
I love your comment very much because you mentioned, if I understood well, Ljubo Karaman's predromaničke,
Yes.
pre-Romanesque churches,
In Croatia,
mainly
yeah.
in a coast of
Yes.
Dalmatia. Okay, and the second one comment of yours was something that I'm closely related to. When I discovered Christiania in Copenhagen, I found relieving resemblance with Bosnia. I said,
Yeah.
"Oh man, that's this is the freedom. Like Bosnia somehow doesn't belong, as you just described in a second example of peripheral
Moment,
peripheral
the guy is Ivan Rupnik. He's
okay. I don't know about that
theoretician,
one.
yeah.
Yes, but I love it. I mean, just personally for me. Thank you very much.
So it means we are in this between. I mean, in the freedom, the Bosnia is now in that part.
More questions? Yes, please.
So, actually, two questions for the artists. Do you in any way use the knowledge that you get from interaction of people with your art? And can you use that knowledge, did you ever use it for developing another stage of that piece or maybe even a new piece? That's one question. Molly, please don't forget it. The other one is, there's a lot of things going on in the world today, and if we take these crises as centers, how art world can or does it, or how fast, or is it too slow? The answer of our art world in any way that could, change minds or some kind of general change in that situation. I'm referring to wars that are happening now, and migrations and everything. Thanks.
Yes. Yeah, I did actually. I thought, okay, I need to do something that is very easy. And I made a piece called Flower Drop, where I'm just this character carrying around a huge bucket of flour, and I walk in the city. And once in a while, I drop a flower and I see what happens. So everything you have to do if you come across this dropped flower is to pick it up and keep it. That was an easy task. and a task that most people would do, and also less material or easy to carry around. I mean, you can always find a bucket of flowers, and you can always perform this piece. You can perform it anywhere where you find flowers. So that came out of like practical issues, and sort of worked, literally.
It's a question for anybody actually who can answer. Another about crisis as being centers and artists are periphery, and how that periphery can answer or help or dissolve or whatever do with the crisis.
Yeah, the answer to the first question is, for me, yes, I use everything in creating my artworks, and definitely the interaction with the how the audience interact with my piece is always so inspiring. So yes, the answer is yes. And for the second question, I think that that in my case, maybe in one point had a hope that my artworks can bring bigger changes than they do, especially in a local community, like in a and yes, I'm happy that I experience those small moments of changes and how my works really influence certain things, but now I don't have that big ambitions, or I'm more grounded in just being happy that what I do can offer some corrective force. And but in the big pictures, when we look at the news, I'm not sure that whatever artists do is enough. And few years ago, I made a work called Lemet Vav, Not Enough. It's about the righteous one, you know, this notion of which you have in the religions or also in mythology and in different, you know, like beliefs of, you know, the existence of the righteous one on this world, like Sodom and Gomorrah, you know, like if the God will destroy the world, if there is enough righteous ones who live, you know, like those who don't know that they are righteous, but they act righteous. And this idea is actually that, you know, no matter of the number of these righteous ones, is it 12 or how many, or it's never enough of those who are doing right thing, and in that sense it's also about the art, like, you know, we do try, but I think it, you know, like it needs more of us to try and to make it a better place again. Yeah.
I think emphasis is on more of us, and I think, you know, that talking about the crisis and the war and everything that we have around, that one artist or one artwork can't do much, of course. But I think what we have at the moment and in the history is a critical mass of artists and intellectuals who create world conscience, you know, that helps a lot. And can you imagine the world without it? To leave it only to the economists and to the politicians. So I think this is, more we are, better it would be.
Yes, please.
Like in Denmark, when you make a public art piece and it's state funded by the Danish Arts Foundation, there will always be a group of people that love it, and then there will be a group of people that hate it. And the people who hate it, they write letters in the newspaper and complain because the money, the state money, are paid by our tax money. So we also artists pay like up to 45% of their salary or what they earn to the state, back to the state, which means we can have like art in public, for example. So it often creates like horrible debates, but sometimes it also creates really good debates. But I think the fact that art can create discussion and make different people talk and discuss is good and is a goal in itself. The Danish Arts Foundation have had a campaign that is called Our Art, which means that if you get support, you have to, and you post a picture, you have to credit the Arts Foundation, and for example on Facebook and Instagram, you have to make this hashtag, say like our art, vores kunst. So the state wants everyone to feel that everyone owns the art, and sometimes it's the discussions and can be very heated. But in general, I've been thinking about it. I think it's good. I think that art, if people can meet around art and discuss around art, it's good, even if they don't agree. So, in that way, it's a social goal.
Just watching the time and respecting the time of all of us, I would suggest that if you have more questions, you can ask later here around by drinking, dancing, and eating. Thank you very much one more time. Thank you very much for coming, and let's have fun.